My name is Joseph Cole, and for the past 15 years I have dedicated my career to managing high-value client portfolios at Westbridge Solutions. At 42 years old, I hold the position of Senior Account Manager, overseeing a portfolio valued at approximately $1.8 million. My role is not just a job to me, it's a commitment to precision, reliability, and delivering measurable results. Over the years, I've earned a reputation for meticulous record-keeping and a calm, steady professionalism that my clients and colleagues have come to trust implicitly. On the morning of what should have been an ordinary team meeting, I found myself at the epicenter of a professional betrayal so blatant, it stunned me into silent calculation. We were in the conference room, 33 people present, including myself and my boss, Mark Dalton, the regional director. As the meeting progressed, I noticed Mark's demeanor shift. An unusual smirk crept across his face, one that immediately raised a red flag in my mind. Without prior warning or explanation, he logged into the system and began deleting files. My client files. One after another, they disappeared from the server, as 32 colleagues watched in disbelief. The moment he finished, Mark's eyes met mine, and with a cold, almost mocking tone, he said, "Files gone." The words hung in the room, a chilling confirmation of my worst fears, a public, humiliating undermining of my work and professional integrity. Despite the shock, I maintained my composure. My reply was calm and measured, understood. Inside, however, I was already shifting gears, running through the immediate implications and formulating my next steps with calculated precision. In my line of work, client data isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's the foundation of long-term relationships and trust, meticulously built over years. Each file represented hours of negotiations, strategic planning, and customized service delivery. The sudden deletion was more than a data loss. It was an attack on my professional credibility and the livelihood tied to those clients. As the room buzzed with murmurs and the eyes of my teammates locked onto me, I recognized this moment as the opening move in what would be a high-stakes confrontation. Mark's decision to delete my files publicly was not merely a dynamic of personal conflict. It was a calculated maneuver, likely driven by internal corporate politics and financial agendas. The brazenness of the act, in front of an entire meeting, suggested he wanted to send a message. To me, to the team, and to anyone else watching. But I was not going to respond with confrontation or panic. Instead, I mentally catalogued every detail. The exact time the deletion occurred, the presence of witnesses, the system logs that would record his access, and the contractual ownership of those client files, all elements that would become critical in documenting this breach. I reminded myself that in situations like this, professionalism and strategic patience were the most effective tools. Emotional reactions, while human, would only undermine my position. I knew I had to act decisively but methodically. This wasn't just about recovering deleted files. It was about safeguarding my career, protecting my clients, and asserting the rights I had earned through years of diligent work. Behind the calm exterior, I began calculating the next moves, envisioning how to leverage the comprehensive audit logs I maintained, the encrypted client contact lists secured under my control, and the signed contracts that explicitly established my ownership of the portfolio. In that moment, I understood this public betrayal was only the beginning of a much larger challenge. Mark had underestimated the depth of my preparation and the strength of the professional safeguards I had built around my work. The files might have been deleted from the system interface, but the records, the evidence, and the legal rights remained intact, and I was ready to use them. As the meeting continued, the atmosphere tinged with discomfort and speculation, I remained composed. I didn't allow the smirk from my boss or the whispered conversations of my colleagues to distract me. Instead, I focused on documenting every detail, knowing that the path forward would demand not only resilience, but a disciplined, strategic approach to reclaiming what was rightfully mine and holding those responsible accountable. Over the course of 15 years, I built and maintained relationships with more than 50 clients, each one unique in their needs and expectations. This wasn't about simply managing accounts. It was about cultivating trust, understanding business goals, and delivering solutions that drove consistent growth. My clients ranged across various industries, technology firms, financial services, and manufacturing companies, but the common thread was my commitment to producing tangible results. Consistently, I delivered an average of 20% revenue growth annually for my portfolio. This wasn't happenstance. It was the product of carefully tailored strategies, proactive communication, and anticipating market shifts before they impacted the client's business. I developed proprietary client tracking systems that gave me a competitive edge. These systems integrated client data, interaction history, and predictive analytics, allowing me to offer personalized service that aligned with each client's evolving priorities. One of the key elements that safeguarded my position, and more importantly my clients' interests, was the series of contracts I meticulously negotiated at the outset of every relationship. These contracts contained clauses granting me exclusive rights to the client contact information and specifying portfolio ownership terms that protected my role as their dedicated account manager. This legal framework was my professional safeguard, a bulwark against attempts to sever those relationships without due process. Last year alone, my portfolio generated approximately $360,000 in commissions, a figure reflecting both the volume and value of business I managed. These commissions weren't just numbers on a paycheck. They represented years of relationship building and strategic account development. To ensure accuracy and transparency, I maintained detailed audit logs of every client interaction, contract amendment, and system change related to my portfolio. These logs were time-stamped, encrypted, and backed up daily to secure servers, eliminating any ambiguity about the sequence of events or ownership. Data integrity was paramount. I implemented multi-layered encryption for client contact lists, ensuring that only I had the decryption keys. This technical control was critical. It meant that even if files were deleted or accessed without authorization, the underlying client data remained protected and recoverable. This foresight was a direct result of my experience navigating previous challenges where client confidentiality and data security were at risk. My diligence and the systems I developed made me invaluable to Westbridge Solutions, but also a target. Mark Dalton's aggressive cost-cutting agenda viewed my compensation package, consisting of a $120,000 base salary plus benefits and commission, as expendable overhead. What he didn't fully appreciate was that the portfolio I managed wasn't simply a financial asset. It was a strategic revenue engine supported by legal contracts and robust technical safeguards. This background is what framed the context of the betrayal I faced that day. The deletion of my client files wasn't merely a technical act. It was a calculated attempt to dismantle years of professional effort and claim ownership of my work for cheaper, less experienced replacements. But the reality was that Mark underestimated the power of systems grounded in precise documentation, legal protections, and technical controls. The ensuing conflict wasn't about whether the files existed. It was about who legitimately controlled those client relationships and the value embedded within them. As I reflected on this, it became clear that my next steps had to reinforce this professional foundation. Leveraging my proprietary client tracking systems, audit logs, and legally binding contracts would be essential in establishing the facts with undeniable clarity. This wasn't just about reclaiming deleted data. It was about asserting rightful ownership and protecting the financial interests tied to my portfolio. The value I had built was quantifiable, not just in dollars and percentages, but in the trust cultivated over many years. This value was backed by rigorous documentation and technical safeguards designed precisely for moments like this. Rather than react emotionally to the public undermining, I prepared to engage systematically, knowing that my professional expertise and thorough preparation were my strongest assets in navigating the challenge ahead. Mark Dalton had been Westbridge Solutions Regional Director for 5 years, a tenure marked by his relentless focus on cutting costs and boosting short-term financial metrics. Over time, it became clear to me that the pressure he faced from upper management to reduce operational expenses was mounting exponentially. The company had mandated a target to slash $500,000 from the regional budget, a figure that seemed almost arbitrary, but was non-negotiable from his perspective. Mark's approach to meeting this challenge was aggressive and unyielding. From my vantage point, it was obvious why I became a target. My compensation package, $120,000 in base salary, augmented by benefits and a commission structure that could push total earnings well beyond that, stood out as a significant chunk of the budget. When factoring in the commissions I earned, particularly with my portfolio consistently generating $360,000 in commissions alone the previous year, Mark likely saw me as a costly asset rather than an investment. His strategy, as I would later piece together, was to dismantle my position to justify bringing in a junior representative at roughly half my cost, effectively saving the company both salary and benefits expenses. But Mark's plan was not limited to a quiet replacement behind closed doors. His method was audacious and public. By deleting my client files during a team meeting, an act witnessed by over 30 colleagues, he aimed to do more than just reduce headcount. He intended to publicly humiliate me, shatter client trust, and create the appearance that my management of these accounts was flawed or negligent. This would provide a veneer of justification for his decision, masking cost-cutting as performance management. What Mark seemed to overlook, or perhaps chose to ignore, was the comprehensive system of checks and balances I had painstakingly established around my portfolio. First and foremost, my audit logs documented every interaction and system event related to my clients in minute detail. These logs were time-stamped, encrypted, and stored redundantly. They tracked the exact times of login, file access, changes, and deletions. Any deletion of client files outside my authorized access would stand out distinctly as an anomaly. Mark's deletion order, executed without my knowledge or consent, was clearly unauthorized and verifiable in the logs. Moreover, the client contracts I had personally negotiated included explicit clauses that established the legal ownership of the portfolio and client contacts. These contracts granted me exclusive rights to manage and protect client relationships, and importantly, they prohibited unilateral client transfer requests without my involvement or consent. The forged emails Mark allegedly commissioned to claim client transfer requests were contradicted directly by these legally binding agreements. Perhaps the most significant safeguard, and one that Mark grossly underestimated, was the encryption protocol on the client contact lists. I was the sole custodian of the encryption keys, a technical barrier that prevented anyone else from accessing sensitive client contact information, even if files were deleted or copied. This meant that deleting files from the system interface was superficial. Without the keys, the data remained secure and inaccessible to unauthorized personnel. Linda Myers, my employment lawyer, understood the gravity of these oversights immediately when I briefed her. She pointed out that Mark's reckless actions not only breached internal company policy, but also violated several regulatory frameworks governing data protection and employment contracts. The deliberate deletion of files without authorization constituted data tampering, and the public nature of the act suggested an intent to cause reputational harm, which could be interpreted as a breach of fiduciary duty as well. In addition, the withholding of commissions compounded the legal vulnerabilities. The $95,000 in commissions that had been withheld was another red flag. Mark's cost-cutting agenda blinded him to the fact that these commissions were not discretionary, but contractually obligated payments, calculated from business generated by my portfolio. Failure to remit these payments was tantamount to wage theft under employment law. To Mark, the bottom line was simple: reduce costs by any means necessary, including sacrificing a senior employee with a lucrative compensation package. But he failed to appreciate the multi-layered protection I had built around my portfolio. Protection that combined legal contracts, technical controls, and meticulously maintained audit logs. This complex web of safeguards was designed exactly to prevent unauthorized interference and maintain the integrity of client relationships and data. His public deletion of my files was a calculated gamble, but one based on incomplete information and a profound underestimation of my preparedness. Mark's oversight was critical. He neglected to consider that in a professional environment governed by compliance standards and legal accountability, such a blatant act could be documented, challenged, and reversed. At that stage, I was fully aware that Mark's aggressive cost-cutting strategy and personal ambition had set in motion a confrontation with far-reaching implications. This was not a simple personnel change. It was a battle over professional integrity, client ownership, and legal rights. I knew the path forward would require methodical accumulation and presentation of evidence to hold him accountable and protect my interests. The stakes were high, not just for my career and reputation, but also for the clients who depended on my stewardship. And as I began to assemble the facts, it was clear that Mark's miscalculation would be the catalyst for a legal and professional pushback that he was unprepared to face. After the shock of the meeting subsided, the first priority was to verify every detail of what had happened. I immediately accessed the system's deletion logs, records I knew were carefully maintained by our IT department as part of standard protocol. These logs were designed to be tamper-evident, with cryptographic timestamps and user credentials attached to every file alteration or removal. Within minutes, I identified the exact timestamp, 10:03 a.m., coinciding precisely with the moment Mark had publicly deleted my client files during the team meeting. The logs confirmed in black and white that the purge was executed from Mark's account, eliminating any ambiguity or possibility of mistaken identity. This digital evidence was a critical foundation for what I knew would become a protracted dispute. The deletion wasn't just an unfortunate accident or technical glitch. It was a deliberate, traceable act ordered by my superior. The public nature of the event, witnessed by over 30 colleagues, made it impossible for Westbridge Solutions to deny the occurrence, but the logs provided irrefutable proof, pinpointing Mark's direct involvement. Next, I turned my attention to the broader context surrounding the incident. A few hours later, leveraging my internal contacts, I discreetly confirmed that the company had begun the process of hiring a replacement for my role. HR had circulated an opening internally, and job descriptions indicated a junior position, with significantly reduced salary and no commission structure. This move aligned perfectly with Mark's cost-cutting agenda and indicated that the file deletion was a tactical strike to justify my swift removal and transition. Digging deeper, I uncovered forged emails purportedly sent by clients requesting transfers of their accounts to other representatives. These emails were suspicious. Anomalies in headers and digital signatures suggested they were fabricated. Importantly, the clients involved had not authorized these communications. I began cross-referencing these forged requests against my audit logs, which meticulously recorded every client interaction, email exchange, and system access. The inconsistencies were glaring. Official client communications contradicted these forged emails, undermining any attempt to portray me as negligent or irresponsible. Financial discrepancies further complicated the picture. Upon reviewing my commission statements, I noticed that $95,000 in commissions, earnings accrued from recent client renewals and upsells, had been withheld. These payments were contractually owed to me, and their retention appeared to be an additional pressure tactic designed to weaken my position. I catalogued this as a separate but related issue to pursue alongside the data tampering and wrongful dismissal. Methodically, I mapped out the legal breaches embedded in these facts. First, the unauthorized deletion of files constituted blatant data tampering, violating both internal company policies and external data protection regulations. Second, the forged client emails and attempts to reassign accounts without consent breached contractual obligations and fiduciary duties. Third, the withholding of commissions without due cause was a violation of employment and labor laws. I organized this evidence with an eye toward building a comprehensive case. The audit log served as a non-repudiable timeline of events, showing that I had exclusive access to client data and that no legitimate transfer requests had been made. The contracts established my legal ownership of the portfolio and exclusive rights to client contacts. The commission statements documented the financial damages I had already suffered. Throughout this assessment phase, I remained composed, understanding that the strength of my position depended on the clarity and completeness of the documented evidence. Emotional reactions, while understandably natural, would only detract from the rigor required to hold Mark accountable. This initial forensic review solidified my belief that Mark's actions were not simply misguided, but constituted multiple breaches with serious legal ramifications. It also clarified the leverage points I could use for negotiation and, if necessary, litigation. I recognized that the path ahead would require patience, strategic planning, and collaboration with legal counsel to translate this factual groundwork into actionable claims. As I compiled these findings, I mentally prepared for the next steps, engaging legal expertise, securing backup copies of encrypted client data, and building a network of witness statements from colleagues who had directly observed the deletion event. These preparatory measures would be essential to transform raw evidence into a coherent, unassailable case. In sum, this phase of full-scope discovery was crucial. It transformed the initial shock into actionable knowledge, a strategic foundation to reclaim control and to hold those responsible accountable. The deletion of my client files was just the opening salvo in a conflict that would test the robustness of professional documentation and contractual safeguards I had spent years developing. The detailed review underscored that Mark's reckless gambit had not only failed to erase my work, but had instead illuminated the very protections ensuring my rightful claim. Meeting Linda Myers was the calculated next step in translating the raw facts I'd uncovered into a coherent and enforceable professional and legal strategy. Linda, a seasoned employment lawyer with specialized expertise in intellectual property and data protection within corporate environments, immediately grasped the gravity and complexity of my situation. I briefed her on the deletion event, the forged client emails, the withheld commissions, and the contractual protections I had painstakingly negotiated over the years. Her response was measured and precise, mirroring my own professional approach. Joseph, the key to navigating this challenge lies in how meticulously and chronologically you can compile all your documentation. That will be our foundation. Linda emphasized that our first priority was to assemble an indisputable, time-stamped and integrated body of evidence demonstrating the unauthorized deletion and the ensuing breaches. She advised starting with the deletion audit logs, those tamper-evident records maintained by the IT department, which provided a cryptographic chain of custody for every file action. These logs would concretely establish that Mark Dalton initiated and executed the file deletion at 10:03 a.m. during the meeting, as witnessed by over 30 colleagues. This time-stamped evidence was critical, not just to confirm the act, but to frame it within the context of company policy violations and potential regulatory breaches. Next on Linda's checklist were the client contracts. I began gathering every contract I had negotiated, focusing on clauses that explicitly granted me exclusive rights to manage the client portfolio, including the ownership of contact information and restrictions against unilateral client reassignment. Linda underlined the importance of these documents because they legally defined the boundaries of portfolio ownership and client confidentiality. This legal framework would be instrumental in contesting any claims that the clients had authorized transfers or that the company had legitimate grounds for data deletion. Email trails were another vital element. We agreed to conduct a thorough review of all client communications, both inbound and outbound, cross-referencing them against the forged emails that purported to show client initiation of transfer requests. The discrepancies in digital signatures, email headers, and metadata would serve as forensic evidence of tampering. To prepare for this, I exported complete email threads and system-generated logs, ensuring all metadata and message headers were preserved intact. Linda stressed that preserving the chain of custody for these digital communications was paramount to maintaining their admissibility as evidence. Commission statements and payroll records were also pivotal. I assembled detailed statements illustrating the $95,000 in commissions withheld without justification. These records demonstrated the tangible financial harm caused by the company's actions and supported claims of wage violations. Linda pointed out that these documents would factor heavily in negotiations, highlighting the employer's breach of contract and bad faith. Beyond documents alone, Linda recommended collecting witness statements from colleagues who had been present during the deletion incident. She explained that corroborating testimony could strengthen the credibility of the audit logs and demonstrate the public nature of Mark's actions. I reached out discreetly to trusted teammates, asking them to provide written accounts of what they observed, focusing on Mark's demeanor, the timing, and their reactions. Their statements became an additional layer of validation supporting the timeline we were constructing. To safeguard against any loss or tampering of evidence, I immediately secured multiple redundant backups of all relevant data, including encrypted client contact lists. This precaution was essential since Mark's deletion targeted the system interface. The underlying encrypted data was inaccessible without my decryption keys, which remained under my exclusive control. Linda confirmed that these backups would be critical, not only during potential litigation, but also to preserve operational continuity for clients. While compiling this evidence chronologically, I mentally noted a crucial insight. Mark had gravely underestimated the non-repudiation value embedded in the audit logs and the legal strength of the client ownership clauses. He appeared to have viewed the file deletion as a final decisive act, unaware that every step was recorded, every contract meticulously drafted, and every client relationship legally bound to me. This oversight would become a significant leverage point. Linda and I also began mapping out the regulatory clauses Mark's actions violated, including unauthorized data destruction under data protection laws and failure to honor commission agreements under employment statutes. We identified potential claims for wrongful termination, breach of fiduciary duty, and data tampering. Each claim was tied directly to the documentation we were assembling, ensuring a fact-based, legally defensible position. In the ensuing weeks, I maintained strict discipline in communication, channeling all interactions through Linda. We organized the documentation into a comprehensive chronological dossier. Every deletion log entry, contract page, email screenshot, commission ledger, and witness statement cross-referenced and indexed for clarity. This dossier was designed not only to prepare for legal proceedings, but also to present a professional, methodical case to company executives and regulatory bodies. Through this systematic approach, I reaffirmed an essential professional principle. In conflicts where reputations and livelihoods are at stake, precision in documentation and strategic patience are infinitely more powerful than reactive confrontation. The meticulous chronicle we were building became the foundation upon which future negotiations and legal actions would be based. At this juncture, with the dossier growing in scope and depth, the trajectory of the conflict was clear. Mark's reckless gambit was triggering an escalating sequence of accountability, yet the outcome remained open, hinging on our ability to leverage these documents methodically, uphold professionalism, and apply legal frameworks strategically. The stakes were rising, but I was preparing to meet them with the full force of measured, documented expertise. Linda Myers's initial review of the evidence was methodical and thorough, reflecting her expertise in employment law and intellectual property within corporate frameworks. She quickly identified multiple breaches that Westbridge Solutions, and specifically Mark Dalton, had committed. From a legal standpoint, the company had violated key terms of my employment contract, particularly clauses related to data integrity, commission payments, and wrongful termination procedures. The deletion of client files without authorization was not just an internal policy violation, it constituted a clear breach of data protection laws. Linda explained that under regulations like the GDPR and relevant US data security statutes, any deliberate destruction or alteration of protected client data without proper protocol and notification was illegal. The fact that this deletion occurred publicly and without prior warning compounded the severity, highlighting a reckless disregard for both company policy and external compliance mandates. Our audit logs were central to this assessment. These tamper-evident records created a cryptographically secure timeline, showing that Mark personally executed the deletion command at exactly 10:03 a.m. during the team meeting. This incontrovertible digital trail removed any ambiguity about culpability. Moreover, the logs reflected that no prior authorization or escalation had been requested. Mark acted unilaterally. Linda emphasized that this unilateral action violated Westbridge's internal governance, which prescribed multi-level approvals for such data deletions, especially those involving sensitive client portfolios. Further, the client contracts I had negotiated were legally robust. They explicitly granted me exclusive ownership and management rights over the client portfolio, including proprietary rights to client contact data. These contracts prohibited any unilateral client reassignment or data transfer without my explicit consent. The forged emails Mark had attempted to introduce as client requests for transfers were demonstrably fraudulent when cross-referenced with original client correspondence and metadata analyses. This exposed an additional layer of misconduct, intentional fabrication of evidence to justify wrongful termination and portfolio seizure. Linda also scrutinized the withheld commissions. The $95,000 sum had been contractually earned through renewals and upsells, as documented in detailed commission statements and financial records. Their retention constituted a breach of wage and labor laws, tantamount to unlawful withholding of earned compensation. Given that commissions are considered wages under employment law, Westbridge's failure to disburse these funds exposed them to potential claims for wage theft and associated penalties. On the technical front, Linda was particularly interested in the encryption protocols safeguarding the client contact lists. The fact that I held exclusive decryption keys meant the actual client data was secure, despite the superficial deletion of files from the system interface. This technical control underscored that Mark's attempt to erase client contacts was in effect a futile gesture. He could not compromise the underlying data without my cooperation. This fact strengthened our position by demonstrating that I retained operational control and proprietary rights, reinforcing the portfolio's legal ownership. Linda's comprehensive review uncovered a pattern of breaches that extended beyond personnel conflict into corporate governance failures. The deliberate deletion without approval, the fabrication of client requests, commission withholding, and disregard for data protection protocols collectively constituted violations of fiduciary duty, employment contract law, and regulatory compliance. This gave rise to multiple avenues for legal recourse: claims for wrongful termination, breach of contract, data tampering, and potentially regulatory complaints to data protection authorities. Critically, Linda highlighted that Mark's actions appeared premeditated. Internal email correspondence she uncovered showed discussions around budget cuts and the need to restructure my role, suggesting the deletion was a calculated tactic rather than a rash decision. This evidence of intent further strengthened our case, framing Mark's conduct as willful misconduct designed to damage my professional standing and appropriate my client portfolio. We prepared to escalate the matter by filing formal complaints with regulatory bodies overseeing employment and data protection compliance. Linda advised that regulatory scrutiny on unauthorized data destruction was increasing, with penalties for non-compliance now substantial and reputationally damaging. This external pressure would be an asset in negotiations, signaling to Westbridge that the costs of ignoring my claims would far outweigh any short-term savings from the cost-cutting measures. Simultaneously, a pivotal piece of leverage arrived: a formal letter from a competitor's CEO offering $94,000 to acquire my client portfolio. This letter validated the financial value of the portfolio beyond internal assessments and underscored my professional standing within the industry. Linda emphasized that this offer letter was not only a bargaining chip in severance and settlement negotiations, but also a tangible market valuation reinforcing the legitimacy of my claims. It demonstrated that my clients were recognized as valuable assets, independent of Westbridge's flawed management. We began assembling all evidence into a meticulously organized dossier: the deletion audit logs, client contracts, forged email analyses, commission statements, encrypted data backups, witness statements, and the competitor's offer letter. Each document was cross-referenced and chronologically ordered to present an airtight case, demonstrating Westbridge's multiple violations and my undisputed portfolio ownership. Throughout this phase, Linda stressed that professionalism and precision were paramount. The goal was to create an irrefutable narrative, supported by hard evidence, avoiding emotional appeals or speculative accusations. Every assertion needed documentation, and every claim had to be defensible in regulatory or legal forums. This strategic approach would maximize leverage for negotiation and, if necessary, litigation. As we finalized our preparations, I recognized that Mark had gravely underestimated the systemic protections I had established. His attempt to destabilize me through file deletion and fabricated claims had instead exposed his own misconduct. The combination of legal breaches, regulatory violations, and documented evidence positioned me to assert my rights with confidence and compel Westbridge to reckon with the consequences of their actions. The groundwork laid in this crucial phase set the stage for the next moves, engaging Westbridge's HR and legal departments with compelling evidence, leveraging the competitor's offer to negotiate severance, and preparing for potential regulatory and legal proceedings. The calculated and comprehensive case we had built would be instrumental in turning a public betrayal into a professional and legal advantage, a strategic battle fought not with emotion, but with unassailable facts and disciplined execution. After weeks of meticulous preparation, compiling every piece of evidence into a comprehensive, chronological dossier, I made a formal request for a meeting with Westbridge Solutions' human resources and legal departments. The objective was clear: present the documented proof of unauthorized file deletion, contractual breaches, and commission withholding, and to open a channel for official dialogue. I understood that proceeding through internal corporate protocols was essential, not only to maintain professionalism, but to demonstrate that I was giving the company every opportunity to address the issue before escalating further. The meeting request was carefully worded. I emphasized the urgency and seriousness of the situation, referencing the specific audit logs timestamped at 10:03 a.m., the exact moment Mark Dalton executed the deletion of my client files in front of 32 colleagues. I also included an outline of the contractual evidence showing my exclusive portfolio ownership and the legal protections embedded in those agreements. The goal was to ensure HR and legal recognized the weight of the evidence before attending the meeting. On the day of the meeting, I arrived prepared with a well-organized binder containing printed copies of the deletion audit logs, client contracts, email trail analyses, and commission statements, everything cross-referenced and indexed for easy navigation. I also brought digital copies on a secure encrypted USB drive, anticipating requests for electronic review or supplementary analysis. The presence of the competitor's offer letter for $94,000 was particularly strategic. I had shared it discreetly with my lawyer, Linda Myers, and we agreed it would serve as a critical leverage point demonstrating the portfolio's undeniable market value. During the session, I presented my case calmly and systematically. I began by walking through the audit logs in detail, highlighting the cryptographic timestamps and user authentications that irrefutably identified Mark Dalton as the individual who initiated the deletion. I emphasized that this was not a system error or accidental deletion. It was a deliberate act carried out without my knowledge or any authorized approval process dictated by company policy. Next, I reviewed the contractual clauses with HR and legal representatives. I pointed out that each client agreement I negotiated contained explicit language affirming my exclusive rights over client contacts and portfolio management. These contracts prohibited unilateral client transfers and required mutual consent for any reassignment. I underscored that the forged emails allegedly requesting client transfers directly contradicted the original client communications and metadata, which I provided as evidence. This demonstrated clear tampering and potential fraud. I also detailed the financial impact, the withholding of $95,000 in commissions that were contractually earned and documented in my commission statements and payroll records. I stressed that this withholding was not just a contractual breach, but a violation of employment and labor regulations related to wage payments. These financial damages were tangible and immediate, further compounding Westbridge's legal exposure. Throughout the presentation, I maintained an objective, fact-based tone, consciously avoiding any emotional reaction or accusatory language. My focus was on the evidence and the legal framework, reflecting the professionalism that had defined my career. The HR and legal teams listened attentively, taking notes and requesting clarifications on technical details, particularly around the encryption keys I held for client contact data, a crucial point affirming that, despite the deletion, the underlying data remained secure and inaccessible to unauthorized personnel. Simultaneously, I shared the competitor's offer letter with Linda, who reviewed it meticulously. We understood this document's strategic value. It quantified the portfolio's market worth outside Westbridge's internal valuation, strengthening my negotiating position for severance or settlement discussions. The offer validated the commercial significance of the clients and underscored that the portfolio was an asset with recognized external value. Following the meeting, I formally communicated my intent to pursue negotiations centered on severance agreements, commission payments, and protection of my intellectual property rights related to the client tracking systems I developed. I made it clear that all further correspondence would proceed through legal channels, reinforcing the professional boundaries necessary to prevent informal or coercive discussions. Meanwhile, Mark remained unaware of the depth and readiness of the case against him. He continued advancing the onboarding of his chosen replacement, presumably confident that his cost-cutting measures and public intimidation tactics had secured his objectives. This complacency worked to my advantage, as it allowed me to proceed unobstructed with my strategic preparations. Throughout this phase, I maintained meticulous records of all communications, meetings, and internal responses, fully aware that any gaps or inconsistencies could weaken my case. I continued gathering witness statements from colleagues who had observed the deletion event and documented their accounts formally through written affidavits. Internally, I reflected on Mark's critical error, his failure to recognize that in a corporate environment governed by compliance, data protection laws, and professional ethics, such a brazen act could not go unchecked. The audit logs, client contracts, and encrypted data safeguards were not just bureaucratic artifacts. They were active defenses that I had deliberately constructed over years, anticipating the kind of challenge I now faced. This phase marked a turning point. By engaging Westbridge's HR and legal departments head-on, armed with incontrovertible evidence and legal expertise, I was shifting the conflict from a personal betrayal to a formal, systematic confrontation. The tools of professionalism, documentation, legal counsel, and strategic negotiation were now fully deployed. The situation remained precarious. Westbridge had yet to respond substantively to the evidence presented, and the competitor's offer hung in the background as a potential catalyst for resolution or escalation. The path forward required patience, discipline, and continued adherence to protocol to ensure that when the consequences began to materialize, they would do so with maximum impact and minimal risk to my professional standing. In this moment, leveraging the strength of facts and legal frameworks rather than emotion or confrontation was the clear, calculated course. The battle lines were drawn. The next moves would determine not only my career trajectory, but also set a precedent for accountability within the company. Within days of formally presenting my dossier and initiating the internal escalation, Westbridge's IT department flagged system irregularities directly linked to the missing client data from my portfolio. The issue was no longer abstract or confined to internal politics. It had become a palpable operational disruption. The deletion of files wasn't just a symbolic act of sabotage, it was materially impacting Westbridge's ability to serve key clients, and that was drawing immediate attention from multiple directions. The IT team's incident report detailed that multiple routine processes had failed due to the absence of critical client records. Automated billing cycles were disrupted, scheduled client communications were missed, and integration points with CRM platforms were generating error alerts. These system anomalies were traceable back to the exact timestamp of the deletion, 10:03 a.m. on the day of the meeting, corroborating the audit logs I had secured previously. The technical team explicitly noted that the deletions were unauthorized, and the logs pinpointed Mark Dalton's user credentials as the executor of the file purge. Simultaneously, a number of my primary clients began reaching out directly to me, bypassing Westbridge's general communication channels. Their messages reflected confusion and concern, with several clients reporting that they had noticed anomalies in their account management, missing data, unexplained communication lapses, or requests for information that Westbridge staff could no longer adequately support. These direct contacts underscored a critical reality. The deletion had begun eroding client trust, jeopardizing long-term relationships that had taken years to build. One client in the technology sector emailed me with frank concerns. "Joseph, we're confused about recent communications. Our team hasn't received expected quarterly reports, and our account manager seems unavailable. Can you clarify?" Another from financial services called directly, expressing frustration over missed deadlines and fearing their compliance requirements might be compromised. These client interactions were invaluable. They not only confirmed the operational impact, but also provided qualitative evidence of the reputational damage unfolding. Aware of the stakes, I responded promptly to each client, maintaining a tone of calm professionalism. I acknowledged the disruption without casting blame prematurely, assuring them that I was actively working to resolve the situation and restore stability. By keeping these lines of communication open, I reinforced my ongoing commitment and preserved goodwill outside the corporate fray. These exchanges were also carefully documented and time-stamped, creating an evidentiary trail that demonstrated my proactive client stewardship despite the internal crisis. Meanwhile, regulatory bodies charged with overseeing data protection and employment compliance initiated preliminary inquiries. Complaints had been lodged anonymously by insiders within Westbridge and concerned clients who feared breaches of confidentiality and contractual obligations. I was notified of these inquiries through my legal counsel, Linda Myers, who advised close coordination to ensure full transparency and compliance on my part. We anticipated that regulatory scrutiny would intensify as these investigations unfolded. Mark Dalton's position began to visibly deteriorate as the professional and legal pressure mounted. In a telling development, he reached out to me personally by phone, attempting to negotiate an informal resolution. His offer was a consulting fee, framed as a goodwill gesture to close this quietly and avoid escalation. I maintained my composure and professionalism, firmly declining and redirecting him to communicate exclusively through my attorney. Every interaction was meticulously recorded and logged by Linda's team, preserving a chain of documented refusals to informal settlements. This moment underscored the shifting dynamics. The man who had publicly humiliated me was now seeking to contain the fallout, a tacit acknowledgement that his position was compromised. Yet I remained detached and focused on the broader strategy. Acceptance of such an offer without addressing the full scope of violations would have undermined the integrity of my claims and weakened my leverage. Behind the scenes, I continued coordinating closely with Westbridge's HR and legal departments, supplying additional documentation and responding to procedural requests. The company's internal investigations were underway, but the tone was cautious. Westbridge was clearly aware that the situation was escalating beyond a routine personnel dispute and that external regulatory and legal consequences loomed. The ripple effects extended beyond the company walls. Industry peers and competitors, through informal networks, had begun to hear of the incident. Speculation circulated about Westbridge's internal turmoil and the risks of client portfolio instability. I was careful to maintain discretion, adhering strictly to confidentiality agreements and professional ethical standards, but the undercurrent of reputational risk was unmistakable. Despite the mounting pressures, I stayed resolute in my approach, letting the documented facts and legal groundwork speak for themselves. This phase was a critical transition from initial shock and evidence gathering to the emergence of tangible consequences. System failures, direct client concerns, regulatory interest, and the antagonist's concessions all signaled that the professional and legal trap we had meticulously set was beginning to close. The situation was far from resolved, but the foundation was solid. The evidence was undeniable. The client relationships were still intact through careful communication, and the regulatory path had been engaged. The next phase would demand continued strategic discipline to convert these developments into formal accountability, while safeguarding my professional standing and client interests. We filed a lawsuit against Westbridge Solutions shortly after the initial fallout, citing wrongful termination, data tampering, and unlawful commission withholding. The foundation of our case rested on irrefutable evidence, cryptographically secured audit logs that pinpointed the exact time and source of the file deletions, along with the client contracts that unequivocally established my legal ownership and management rights over the portfolio. These documents were the backbone of our claims and left no room for ambiguity or denial. Linda and I worked closely to draft the complaint, ensuring every allegation was supported by meticulously compiled documentation. The wrongful termination claim was grounded in the fact that I was dismissed without just cause, and certainly without adherence to Westbridge's contractual and procedural obligations. The timing and manner of my termination, immediately following the file deletions, strongly suggested a retaliatory motive designed to circumvent my contractual protections. The data tampering charge was particularly significant. The deliberate deletion of client files by Mark Dalton, unauthorized and executed without following the company's mandated approval protocols, constituted not only an internal policy violation, but also a breach of data protection statutes. We highlighted that client data is protected under numerous regulatory frameworks, including state-level statutes and industry-specific mandates. Destroying such data without proper authorization or notification exposed Westbridge, and by extension Mark personally, to serious regulatory penalties. Our legal team submitted the complaint to the court with comprehensive exhibits. The deletion logs extracted directly from the company's secure servers, demonstrating Mark's unique user credentials linked to the deletion commands at the precise timestamp of 10:03 a.m. Signed client contracts with clear portfolio ownership language, and a detailed audit trail showing the absence of any valid client transfer requests, contrary to the forged emails Westbridge attempted to rely on. Simultaneously, we included evidence of the company's failure to pay $95,000 in commissions that were contractually owed to me. This withholding was a clear breach of my employment agreement and labor law protections. We documented the commission statements, payment schedules, and contractual terms explicitly guaranteeing those earnings. The financial harm was quantifiable and directly attributable to Westbridge's unlawful actions. As the lawsuit progressed, regulatory investigations followed suit. Data protection authorities initiated audits into Westbridge's handling of client information, focusing on compliance with applicable laws governing data integrity, destruction, and employee rights. Their inquiries confirmed many of our allegations, increasing pressure on Westbridge to address the systemic failures and Mark's misconduct. Clients began to lose confidence in Westbridge's ability to safeguard their interests. Several formally terminated their contracts, citing breach of trust and inadequate account management. The portfolio erosion wasn't just a financial loss for the company, it was a reputational blow that underscored the real-world impact of Mark's reckless actions. Mark Dalton's position rapidly deteriorated under this mounting pressure. His attempts at damage control included informal offers to reinstate me or negotiate settlements, which I rejected outright. Maintaining strict professional boundaries, I instructed him to direct all communication to my legal counsel. Each documented refusal further emphasized my resolve to pursue full accountability rather than quick fixes. Internally, Westbridge's leadership faced increasing scrutiny. Human resources and legal departments began distancing themselves from Mark's unilateral decisions as more evidence surfaced, showing his deliberate sabotage and violation of fiduciary duties. The company was compelled to launch internal investigations, which only unearthed additional irregularities, compounding their legal exposure. Throughout this period, Linda and I coordinated rigorously to respond to discovery requests, prepare depositions, and solidify witness testimonies. Colleagues who had witnessed the deletion event provided sworn affidavits confirming the public nature of the act, and Mark's demeanor, smirks, and dismissive comments included. Their statements complemented the technical evidence by painting a clear picture of premeditated misconduct. Importantly, the competitor's letter offering $94,000 to acquire my client portfolio remained a critical leverage point. It served as an objective market valuation, validating the financial and professional value embedded in the portfolio. This external recognition underscored the baselessness of Westbridge's attempts to devalue my work and reinforced the strength of our legal position. The convergence of legal filings, regulatory investigations, client defections, and internal corporate turmoil created a multifaceted professional and legal trap. Each layer reinforced the others, generating mounting pressure on Westbridge's management and compelling them to consider serious consequences for Mark. Yet, despite the growing storm, I maintained a measured, methodical approach. My focus was on the integrity of the process, rather than reactive confrontation. I documented every interaction, preserved the chain of custody for all evidence, and coordinated closely with Linda to ensure our legal strategy adapted fluidly to developments. This phase was critical. It transitioned the conflict from an internal dispute to a comprehensive professional and legal challenge. The foundation we had laid through precise documentation and strategic patience was now driving forward consequences that would reshape the trajectory of my career, the company's operations, and Mark's professional standing. The situation remained unresolved, but the momentum had shifted decisively. Westbridge was no longer in control. The legal and regulatory frameworks we invoked were imposing systematic accountability. As the case unfolded, I prepared for the next stages: potential settlements, continued litigation, and professional rebuilding, armed with the certainty that the truth was on my side and that the evidence would speak louder than any smirk or attempt at intimidation. The mounting pressure on Mark Dalton and Westbridge Solutions became unmistakably apparent as the investigations deepened and the fallout extended across multiple fronts. Within weeks of the lawsuit filing and regulatory inquiries, Westbridge's internal review led to Mark's suspension pending a full investigation. The company acknowledged, albeit quietly, that his unilateral deletion of client files and the subsequent breaches of protocol could not be overlooked. This disciplinary action sent a clear signal internally. The consequences of Mark's reckless decisions were real and escalating. Simultaneously, the regulatory authorities charged with enforcing data protection and employment laws imposed a substantial fine on Westbridge, $350,000, for multiple violations uncovered during their audits. These penalties stemmed from unauthorized data destruction, failure to secure client information appropriately, and breaches of labor laws concerning withheld commissions. The fine was not only financially significant, but also a public relations blow, signaling to the industry and clients alike that Westbridge had failed in its fiduciary and compliance responsibilities. The operational impact on Westbridge was severe and rapidly unfolding. Within 3 months, the company's client base eroded by approximately 15%. This attrition rate was directly attributed to the disruption caused by the deletion incident and the ensuing loss of trust. Clients, many of whom had long-standing relationships with me, were alarmed by the apparent internal chaos and mismanagement. Several formally terminated contracts, citing concerns over data integrity and account continuity. The erosion was compounded by client referrals drying up and new business opportunities waning amid the reputational damage. Internally, the atmosphere at Westbridge shifted dramatically. Morale among the account management team dipped as colleagues witnessed the fallout from Mark's actions and the company's faltering response. Whistleblowers came forward, revealing additional instances of mismanagement and questionable practices under Mark's regional leadership. These disclosures triggered further investigations and compounded the company's legal and regulatory exposure. The pattern of behavior that had targeted me was not isolated. It appeared systemic, rooted in a culture of aggressive cost-cutting at the expense of ethical and professional standards. The media and industry publications began to pick up on the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about corporate governance failures and the dangers of prioritizing short-term financial metrics over client relationships and data security. Westbridge's public image suffered considerably, with analyst reports highlighting risk factors related to management instability and client attrition. This negative press further contributed to a decline in stock prices and investor confidence, creating additional financial strain for the company. Mark's personal and professional standing deteriorated rapidly in parallel. The suspension escalated to a formal inquiry into his conduct, with his professional licenses and certifications coming under review by regulatory boards. The evidence of premeditated data tampering and breach of fiduciary duty severely undermined his credibility. The company's legal counsel distanced themselves from his defense, focusing instead on damage control and negotiating settlement frameworks. Internally, Mark became isolated, with colleagues wary of association given the growing scandal. On a personal level, I learned through discreet channels that Mark's marriage was experiencing significant strain, reportedly due to the financial and reputational pressures stemming from the unfolding crisis. While this was peripheral to the professional battle, it underscored the comprehensive fallout that can arise when misconduct reaches this scale. It was a stark reminder that these conflicts extend beyond the office, affecting lives on multiple levels. Amid these turbulent developments, I maintained a disciplined focus on recovering my financial entitlements and professional reputation. I formally filed claims, seeking not only the $95,000 in withheld commissions, but also damages related to the breach of contract, emotional distress, and reputational harm. My legal team worked diligently to quantify these claims with supporting documentation, ensuring that every asserted loss was backed by precise records and contractual terms. The company began preliminary negotiations regarding these claims, attempting to contain the damage through settlement discussions. However, I remained resolute in my approach, insisting on full acknowledgement of the violations and appropriate compensation reflecting the scale of the wrongdoing. My stance was clear. Resolution would not be rushed or superficial. It required accountability and restoration, commensurate with the professional and financial harm endured. Throughout this period, I continued engaging with my clients directly, reinforcing trust and transparency. By openly communicating within the bounds of confidentiality and professionalism, I helped stem further erosion of my personal portfolio and ensured continuity of service. This proactive client stewardship contrasted sharply with Westbridge's faltering response, further highlighting the gap between my professional conduct and the company's crisis management. The combined impact of Mark's suspension, regulatory fines, client losses, and media scrutiny created a cascade of consequences that reshaped the corporate landscape at Westbridge. The regional management team was forced into a restructuring process, with new oversight mechanisms introduced to prevent similar breaches. This period of upheaval was challenging for all involved, but underscored the critical importance of governance, ethical leadership, and respect for contractual and data integrity obligations. As these consequences unfolded, my professional strategy remained consistent: methodical documentation, maintaining legal rigor, and fostering client relationships. The situation was far from resolved, and the stakes remained high. Yet the shifting dynamics demonstrated that my calculated approach was effectively leveraging systemic pressures to hold those responsible accountable, while laying the groundwork for a stronger professional future. The next phase would require continued vigilance and strategic negotiation, ensuring that the damage inflicted could be not only acknowledged, but also remedied in a way that restored my career trajectory and financial security. The professional and legal trap had been sprung, and its cascading effects were reshaping the playing field, an evolving situation demanding patience, precision, and unwavering commitment to principles over reaction. The judicial process unfolded over several intense months, each hearing and deposition reinforcing the strength of the evidence we had meticulously compiled. The court's ruling ultimately awarded me $160,000, a figure encompassing lost commissions, compensatory damages for the breach of contract and wrongful termination, and coverage of legal fees. This judgment was a concrete affirmation that the professional and legal frameworks I had relied upon were not only theoretically sound but practically enforceable. It recognized that the deliberate deletion of client files, the withholding of earned commissions, and the orchestration of a campaign to undermine my career constituted actionable violations with measurable financial harm. The court's decision was detailed and comprehensive. The judgment explicitly cited the tamper-evident audit logs as incontrovertible proof that Mark Dalton had ordered and executed the deletion of my client files without authorization. The ruling underscored that this act breached multiple layers of company policy and federal data protection statutes, which require strict procedural controls and accountability when handling sensitive client information. The court also examined the contractual language I had painstakingly negotiated, confirming that the exclusive portfolio ownership and client contact rights I held were valid and enforceable. This legal recognition was crucial, as it invalidated the forged emails and baseless claims used by Westbridge to justify the reassignment of my clients. Moreover, the judgment took into account the financial impact of the $95,000 in commissions withheld by Westbridge. It emphasized that commissions, as part of earned wages, are protected under employment law, and that the company's failure to pay them constituted unlawful wage withholding. Compensatory damages were awarded not only for the direct financial loss, but also for the reputational harm. and emotional distress caused by the public and deliberate nature of the file deletions and wrongful termination. Parallel to the court proceedings, regulatory bodies imposed significant penalties on Westbridge Solutions. After comprehensive audits by data protection authorities, the company was fined $350,000 for systemic violations, including unauthorized data destruction, failure to safeguard client information appropriately, and breaches of labor regulations related to commission payments. This fine was a public acknowledgement of the company's governance failures and sent a strong message within the industry about the consequences of neglecting compliance and fiduciary duties. The regulatory findings also highlighted deficiencies in Westbridge's internal controls and management oversight, factors that compounded Mark Dalton's individual culpability. The ramifications for Westbridge were profound and multifaceted. The company faced immediate pressure to restructure its regional management team. The board mandated new governance policies emphasizing data security, contractual compliance, and ethical leadership. Mark Dalton was formally suspended and subsequently dismissed following the regulatory and legal investigations. His professional reputation suffered irreparable damage. Industry associations conducted reviews that ultimately blacklisted him from holding leadership positions within comparable firms. This professional exile underscored the severity of the misconduct and the long-term consequences of ethical breaches in corporate leadership. Client confidence in Westbridge deteriorated rapidly. Within 3 months of the public disclosures and legal actions, the company experienced a 15% decline in its client base. Within my former portfolio's sectors, former clients cited breaches of trust, concerns about data integrity, and disrupted account management as primary reasons for contract terminations. This erosion not only impacted Westbridge's revenue, but also tarnished its reputation within competitive markets. Industry publications chronicled the scandal extensively, framing it as a case study in the risks of aggressive cost-cutting at the expense of professional and ethical standards. Analysts highlighted the incident as a cautionary example of how mismanagement can culminate in significant financial and reputational losses. The restructuring process at Westbridge introduced a new leadership team tasked with restoring compliance and rebuilding client trust. They implemented enhanced audit protocols, improved data encryption standards, and revised commission payment processes to prevent recurrence. The company also engaged external consultants to conduct ethics and governance training, signaling a commitment to cultural change. However, the damage to their standing was systemic and would require sustained effort to repair. Alongside corporate repercussions, whistleblower reports emerged from other departments, revealing additional questionable practices under Mark Dalton's tenure. These reports triggered further internal investigations and regulatory scrutiny, expanding the scope of accountability beyond my individual case. The systemic nature of the misconduct exposed a broader culture of prioritizing short-term financial targets over legal and professional responsibilities. My legal team successfully negotiated the recovery not only of the withheld commissions, but also additional damages related to emotional distress and reputational harm. Furthermore, through detailed contract clauses and intellectual property provisions, I secured exclusive rights to the proprietary client tracking system I had developed. This was particularly important as it prevented Westbridge or Mark from leveraging my innovations without authorization, preserving my competitive edge. The competitor who had offered $94,000 to acquire my client portfolio completed the transaction following the court's ruling. This acquisition validated the portfolio's market value independently of Westbridge's internal assessments and underscored the professional recognition of my client stewardship. The competitor integrated the portfolio smoothly, ensuring continuity of service and reinforcing the tangible worth of the relationships I had built over the years. On a personal note, the culmination of legal victories and industry recognition was tempered by the awareness of the wider impact on Mark Dalton. His professional downfall was stark, reflecting the seriousness of willful misconduct in leadership. Reports surfaced that his personal life was also unraveling under the strain of financial liabilities and reputational damage, a sobering reminder of the profound consequences professional ethics, or the lack thereof, can have beyond corporate walls. Throughout this process, I remained committed to a strategy grounded in professionalism, evidence, and legal rigor. The resolution of this chapter did not come from confrontation or emotional reaction, but from a disciplined application of contractual rights, regulatory frameworks, and strategic negotiation. The case became a landmark within professional circles, often cited in industry forums and legal seminars as an exemplar of how systematic documentation and patient, methodical action can transform apparent defeat into a platform for vindication. While the judgment and corporate restructuring marked critical milestones, the situation was dynamic, with ongoing implications for client relationships, industry trust, and future career opportunities. The professional battlefield had shifted, but the necessity for vigilance, strategic foresight, and unassailable documentation remained paramount. This outcome was a testament to the power of maintaining integrity, preparedness, and composure in the face of calculated betrayal. Accepting the $95,000 offer from the competitor was a strategic decision that marked a new chapter in my professional journey. It wasn't merely about the financial figure. It was about recognition of the true value of the client portfolio I had nurtured over 15 years and the opportunity to reset my career on stronger, more promising ground. The offer validated the months of painstaking documentation, legal preparation, and strategic negotiation that Linda and I had executed with precision. More than compensation, it represented a professional acknowledgement that my work was respected and sought after outside the confines of Westbridge Solutions. When I stepped into my new role as Senior Client Relations Director with the competitor, the transition felt less like starting over and more like an elevation. My base salary increased by 25%, reflecting not only the direct value of the portfolio I brought with me, but also the leadership responsibilities I assumed in guiding client engagement strategies at a higher organizational level. Additionally, securing an equity stake was a critical element. It aligned my interests with the company's long-term success and offered a stake in shaping its future direction. This arrangement gave me both financial upside and a sense of ownership beyond the immediate client relationships. My onboarding was thorough and professional, emphasizing integration of my proprietary client tracking methodologies. The competitor recognized the competitive advantage embedded in my systems and was eager to incorporate those processes into their operational framework. This willingness to adopt and adapt my innovations underscored the respect they had for the depth of my expertise and the solidity of the client relationships I managed. It was a tangible demonstration that my intellectual property was an asset that transcended organizational boundaries and contractual disputes. Beyond the financial and operational gains, the new role offered a markedly improved work-life balance. The company culture was collaborative, transparent, and invested in employee development, a stark contrast to the environment I'd endured at Westbridge. Here, professionalism was not a veneer, but a foundational value. This facilitated a supportive atmosphere where strategic thinking and principled decision-making were encouraged. It was the kind of environment where my years of experience and commitment to detail could flourish without fear of arbitrary undermining or sabotage. Reflecting on the ordeal, the critical lesson for me was the indispensable value of meticulous documentation and strategic patience. Throughout the entire conflict, I remained committed to an evidence-based approach. Every meeting, every communication, every contractual clause was backed by concrete records. This wasn't just about protecting myself legally, it was about maintaining professional integrity in the face of adversity. I learned that emotional reactions, while understandable, risked clouding judgment and undermining credibility. Instead, measured responses anchored in documented facts and legal counsel proved infinitely more effective. Understanding the contractual rights embedded in my client agreements was another cornerstone. These contracts weren't just formalities, they were powerful tools that defined ownership, protected client confidentiality, and governed commission entitlements. Knowing these rights inside and out allowed me to identify precisely where breaches occurred and to articulate those violations clearly during negotiations and litigation. This legal literacy was as critical as technical expertise in client management. Strategic patience was perhaps the most challenging yet rewarding aspect. The process unfolded over many months, with setbacks, delays, and moments of uncertainty. But by maintaining professionalism and allowing the legal and regulatory frameworks to work as intended, I transformed what initially seemed like a devastating career blow into a platform for vindication and growth. This slow, methodical approach prevented rash decisions and ensured that each step moved me closer to a superior outcome. Justice in this context was not a matter of personal vengeance or confrontation. It was the systematic application of professional standards, legal principles, and strategic negotiation that ultimately secured a resolution respectful of my contributions and rights. The $95,000 settlement was just one component. The restoration of reputation, the affirmation of ownership, and the career advancement that followed were far more significant. Today, looking back on the entire experience, I stand stronger and more confident. The challenge tested my resolve, but it also reinforced the importance of integrity, preparation, and professionalism. I continue to advocate for transparent documentation and contractual clarity in the industry, sharing this case as an example of how diligence and strategic thinking can overcome even the most brazen attempts at professional sabotage. The journey from that fateful meeting where Mark Dalton deleted my files in front of 32 colleagues to this new phase as Senior Client Relations Director was fraught with difficulty, but ultimately rewarding. It underscored that in the corporate world, control is not just about access to files or titles. It's about owning the narrative through precise documentation, leveraging legal frameworks, and responding with unwavering professionalism. This experience reshaped my career trajectory and strengthened my conviction that methodical strategy is the most powerful tool against professional betrayal.